I felt the tempering by sun and steel, to which I submitted over such a long period, was none other than a process of creating this kind of fluid sculpture, says Yukio Mishima. Have you ever felt trapped by your own mind, lost in a world of words and ideas, so disconnected from reality that you begin to wonder if you've ever truly lived at all? This was the core struggle of Yukio Mishima, one of Japan's most celebrated and controversial novelists. In his book Sun and Steel, Yukio Mishima says, and I quote, "As I pondered the nature of myself, I was driven to the conclusion that what I was seeking, in short, was a language of the body." Mishima added, "If myself was my dwelling, then my body resembled an orchard that surrounded it. I could either cultivate that orchard to its capacity or leave it for the weeds to run riot in. However, I was free to choose. But the freedom was not as obvious as it might seem. From a very early age, Mishima showed signs of sensitivity to his surrounding. He also had his fair shares of problems in his childhood. He was a sickly child and often alienated from his peers. Then one day, it occurred to Yukio Mishima to set about cultivating his orchard for all he was worth. And for this purpose, Mishima used sun and steel. Unceasing sunlight and strong steel became the chief elements in Mishima husbandry. Little by little, the orchard began to bear fruit, and thoughts of the body came to occupy a large part of Mishima consciousness. However, all this did not occur overnight, nor did it begin without the existence of some deep-lying motive. Yukio Mishima was a prodigy of language, but for him, this gift was also a curse. He felt his life had been lived backward. While telling about his childhood, Mishima says, normally in the average person, the body precedes language. But in his case, words came first of all, then belatedly came the flesh. Mishima felt as if he was sadly wasted by words. Words for him were not a window to reality. They were a barrier. He famously called them white ants, a corrosive force that eats away at the solid pillar of truth, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. He believed his own intellect was devouring his connection to life itself. His identity was built on the unstable ground of ideas, and he yearned for something solid. He was searching for a different kind of knowledge, a truth that couldn't be spoken, only felt, a language of the body. In his novel Sun and Steel, he starts by describing the encounter between himself and the sun. Mishima wrote, "My first unconscious encounter was in the summer of the defeat, in the year 1945. There was nothing more than a line of barbed wire entanglements, half broken down, half buried in the summer weeds, tilting in all directions. A relentless sun blazed down on the borderline between the war and the post-war period. And that same sun, as the days turned to months and the months to years, had become associated with a pervasive corruption and destruction in the country. At that time, Yukio Mishima saw the sun as an enemy. It was a merciless light leading youth in droves to its death. This hostility towards the sun was Mishima only rebellion against the spirit of the age, and he started hankering after night, spending most of his time in his dusky room with its piles of books. Later, Mishima gradually sensed that an era was approaching in which to treat the sun as an enemy would be same as following the herd. Little by little, Mishima began to feel uncertain about the night in which he had placed such trust during the war, and started suspecting that he might have belonged with the sun worshippers all along. Mishima understood the men who indulged in nocturnal thoughts and reject sun in its all forms were disconnected from the realities of life and death. It was in 1952, on the deck of the ship on which Mishima made his first journey abroad, where he exchanged a reconciliatory handshake with the sun. And from that day onward, Mishima have found himself unable to part company with sun. The sun became associated with the main highway of Mishima life, and little by little, it tanned his skin brown, branding him as a member of one of its own. This new perspective unlocked a childhood mystery for Mishima. When he was small, he would watch the young men parade the portable shrine through the streets at the local shrine festival. They were intoxicated with their task, and their faces gazed up at the sky. That time Mishima mind was much troubled by the riddle of what it was that those eyes reflected. And after he had begun to learn the language of the body, Mishima understood they were simply looking at the sky. In their eyes there was no vision, only the reflection of the blue and absolute sky. He realized they were experiencing a truth so profound it couldn't be articulated. It could only be shared through collective physical struggle. And this was the truth he now desperately wanted for himself. To learn this new silent language, Mishima turned to steel. He began a fierce regimen of bodybuilding, not for health or for looks, but for philosophy. The steel became his unforgiving teacher. Mishima says, and I quote, "The steel taught me many different things. It gave me an utterly new kind of knowledge, a knowledge that neither books nor worldly experience can impart. Muscles, I found, were strength as well as form, and each complex of muscles was subtly responsible for the direction in which its own strength was exerted, much as though they were rays of light given the form of flesh. When Mishima lifted a certain weight of steel, he was able to believe in his own strength. In a modern world that had forgotten the body, Mishima saw muscles as a form of classical art. He said they had become something akin to classical Greek, a dead language. And to revive that language, the discipline of the steel was required. Mishima's goal was never to simply replace the mind with the body. His quest was for wholeness. He found his ideal in the ancient samurai code of bunbu ryōdō, the dual way of the literary arts and the martial arts, the pen and the sword together. During the last month of his life, Yukio Mishima had an exhibit of his literary career at a department store in Tokyo, where Mishima envisioned his life's work as four rivers flowing into one another: writing, theater, the body, and action. His final act of creation was to merge them, to erase any line between his art and his life. His body was no longer just a vessel. It was his greatest sculpture. His philosophy was no longer just written on the page. It was etched into his very being. And this desperate search for wholeness led Mishima down a dark and tragic path. His philosophy demanded a conclusion where action and belief were perfectly unified. For him, this meant a glorious, self-determined death. Longing at 18 for an early demise, he wrote, "I lacked, in short, the muscles suitable for a dramatic death." For Mishima, a beautiful death was the final, perfect expression of a life lived with purpose and intensity, the ultimate union of body and spirit. On November 25th, 1970, Yukio Mishima enacted his final performance, committing ritual suicide after a failed coup attempt. Mishima's path was extreme, a romantic tragedy of his own design. But we don't have to follow him into the darkness to understand the light in his warning. That's all for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more empowering content. Thanks for watching.